Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here. So you said it, but sorry for the slide in French. It's the only one. So my name is Julia Meyer. I work at ADEM. You introduced it already, really right. Our job basically is to support and mobilize citizens, territories, and public and private actors for the ecological transition, and basically to participate to the collective expertise that we have on the ecological transition. So we publish a lot of studies, indeed. For my part, I work on the evaluation of the environmental impact of digital technologies, and in particular defining common methodologies to do so. So I think yesterday I was looking at ADEM website, and we wrote that we accelerated our digital transformation to simplify the access to information. That's a good thing. But our role is also to understand whether this digital transformation that is really massive is actually a good thing, and at least to what extent it can be. That's really difficult. It's a real challenge, and those 3 days conference show it. There are so many subjects that we put behind digital sector, and also if we try to model even a simple digital service, it's already complex. So to model its environmental impact, it's also really complex. So different equipment interconnecting and exchanging data. So how do we do this? First of all, we start from what we want to achieve. So at the very least, we need to meet our commitments for carbon neutrality in 2050 for France and for the whole world. Carbon neutrality is indeed on a societal scale, so world or national, but not, so not on a citizen or actor scale. And we wrote a study on that too. I recommend you to read it. But actors and sectors must take commitments towards carbon neutrality in 2050. And to do so, we must be able to know in which society these commitments fit. So I will present you today two different work that we are doing in ADEM. The first one is an exercise we did to try to draw 4 different scenarios to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And after that, I will show you different hypotheses that we took for the work in progress for the digital sector. And finally, the published and upcoming regulation that are already giving us a perspective. So last year, some of you may know that we published a 2-year prospective study to define different scenarios that would allow us to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 in France. Sorry for the French point of view, but it can apply to the whole world, of course. So this work is called Transitions 2050. The objective was to draw typical scenarios inspired from the 4 IPCC scenarios, and 4 scenarios that present in deliberately very constructing ways economic, technical, social option for achieving carbon neutrality. So the 4 scenarios all lead to carbon neutrality, but with very different paths. So if you see the first one, frugal generation, is the transition is mainly done by constraint frugality. To the second scenario, marked by the massive mutualization, basically, of service and goods. The third one relies on technologies to decarbonize basically all the sectors, up to the restorative bet or reparating bet, which is basically our current lifestyle, with a really, really strong bet, quite risky, that technologies like CO2 capture will avoid carbon emission and save us. So above all, their objective is to make everyone aware of the nature of transformation and choices to be made. And this reflection covers the main sectors, so building, food, mobility, industry, etc. And one important thing I must say, the big limit of this exercise is that we only look at the greenhouse gases emission indicator to meet our political commitments. But of course, as everyone, Tristan and Lucille and Sarah mentioned, there are a lot of other indicators that are very important too. The impact on biodiversity and fossil resources, the social impact, etc. For those four scenarios, the results are highly heterogeneous, as you may see. So how do we do for digital technologies? So we have seen this morning that digital sector has an environmental impact. So I will not go into detail, but just to give you again some figures, it represents today in France 2.5% of the GHG emissions, around 10% of the electricity consumption in France, and it's also 20 millions of tons of e-waste every year in France. So digital technology must also enable carbon neutrality by 2050. And to ensure this, the approach must be systemic and life cycle. As we mentioned, the manufacture part of equipment represents a huge part of the impact in France, at least. So, and beyond the carbon neutrality, again, other indicators are as much important, so water consumption, etc., etc. So, there is an impact, and how do we project ourselves in 2030 or even 2050? Following the study that we've done to make, a state of the art about the impact in 2020 in France, we also carried out two different exercises, prospective exercise. The first one in 2030 and the second one in 2050. So in 2030, first of all, we look at the trends, the trend scenario emerging from different reports that are already published. 2030, it's tomorrow. So such as a report from the European Commission or EDNA or Cisco, the Senate, etc. So the main assumption that we took for this scenario is for the terminal, the fleet, so the number of terminals increases a lot by 66%. To reach 1.3 billion of terminal in 2013. And the lifespan is equal to 2020. So that changed the impact on the manufacturing part for terminal. On the electricity consumption, we think that the electricity consumption for terminal will be gradually decreasing by 1% to 5% per year, depending on the terminal. On the network part, there will be more deployment, and the electricity consumption will be considered as stable as 2020. And for data centers, we consider that the surface occupied by data center will increase by 10% between 2020 and 2030. And the electricity consumption also increase by 15% because it's getting more dense per unit unit area. So basically, in addition to this train scenario, where we look at the evolution of the impact of digital technologies in France, we look at 3 other scenarios that are the moderate eco-design, the widespread eco-design, and the last one, digital sobriety. So the objective behind this was to objectivize the levers of eco-design and also sobriety to orient public policies. For 4 main parameters was distinguished to change those scenarios. The first one, the number of equipment that and its evolution, the power consumption of each equipment, the lifespan of the terminals, and finally we looked at the growth of data traffic, the evolution of data traffic by 2030. So for eco-design scenarios, the uses and the number of terminals grow the same way as trends, as there is no sobriety, so the use is exactly the same. But the eco-design equipment will last longer, so they will be, for depending on the scenario, the lifespan of terminals goes 1 year more or 2 years more. And we also consider that eco-design allows a reduction of electricity consumption of terminals for both scenarios. And finally, for the sobriety scenarios, the companies and the consumers use less digital technology in a more frugal way. So it means that the lifespan of terminals also increase to 2 years, and the electricity consumption decrease also. And compared to the other 2 scenarios, we consider that the number of terminals will stabilize with the year as the same way as 2020, and the traffic will also grow as the same way as trends. So I will not go into detail for 2050, but we also did an exercise by 2050, and it's a lot more difficult, as both of, I don't know and you don't know too, which technologies will come by 2050. So it's more difficult. Basically, the exercise was only to identify a certain number of trends in terms of technology or geopolitical or regulatory constraint, and to apply it in different ways to the 4 scenarios of ADEM that I just presented before. So I'm not presenting some figures today. The result of this study will be announced in January, so I encourage you to have a look at it. And but yeah, beyond the result, I think the approximation are the most important. We must look at the hypothesis we take and to rethink, challenge it, and project together. So I will be super fast for the next 2 slides that are the last. So how do we project ourselves? There are already some regulation ongoing, at least in France, to try to limit the impact of digital technologies. So the AGEC law, for example, that made mandatory for a certain type of equipment to show this repairability index that it was mentioned before. And more recently, the REN law, it's a law about reducing the environmental impact of digital sector, that also make it mandatory to have an national observatory to have a look at the direct and indirect impact of digital sector, for example, and also to give a framework to eco-design digital services. That's a few examples. And 3 structuring projects that are coming. The government roadmap, digital and environment, that is being implemented for the next years. Also the acceleration strategy on sustainable digital and the program on digital sobriety that we hold with INRIA and Ecoinfo, that will start in 2023 and that will give massive support for research and companies to go on projects to eco-design and more sobriety also. And a last important project that is linked directly to the scenarios I just mentioned is the decarbonization roadmap for the digital sector that just started last month. So yeah, the digital sector needs to, I mean, all the actors need to write a roadmap and show it to the French government in April. So yeah, it's also an important work that everyone should look at it. So yes, I'm done. I just, for a small conclusion, we talk about trajectories and what is being implemented in France. There are a lot of work to be done. What you need to remember from what I tried to share today is that there are different scenarios possible, and that we shouldn't look only at the carbon neutrality. It's really important, but also other indicators are as much important, such as biodiversity, social impact, and other impacts, consumption of resources. So to conclude, we really need to have a more systemic life cycle and multi-criteria look when we think about new technologies coming up. Thank you. That's it for me.